Hello, folks, and welcome to Author Adjacent, a podcast about the journey from hobbyist writer to professional author. I'm your host, Michael Vadney. If you're listening to this, you might not be comfortable calling yourself an author. Even I'm not there yet, but I am Author Adjacent. As we dive into today's episode, know that I am not a professional author. What I am is a man on a journey, and on that journey, I've learned a few things. So as a fellow traveler on the path from writer to author, I started this podcast to share what I've learned and my experiences so far, in the hopes that it will aid you in your personal growth. Folks, I have an announcement. We here at Author Adjacent have decided to partner with Moonlit Getaway, a multi-genre online literary journal set to begin publication in September 23 of 2024. Why am I telling you now? Because their grand opening contest is now accepting submissions in 3 categories: visual art, flash fiction, and poetry. The contest is free to enter and the deadline for submissions is August 1st of this year. It's perfect for author-adjacent writers looking to dip their toe into the world of publication. You can visit them at moonlitgetaway.com for details, or you can follow them on X at moonlitgetaway. And I'll have a link in the description for anyone who is interested. To be clear, I'm not being paid for this. I just think what they have going on over there is interesting and worth notice. But anyways, let's get into the episode. Today's episode topic should be of no surprise to anyone, as I'm sure you saw the title when you clicked it. But in case you didn't see it because you have Author Adjacent on autoplay, in which case good for you, today's episode title is Plot and Theme, the Dynamic Duo. I'll be going over the difference between these two often mixed up terms and how they work together to create fantastic stories that we all enjoy. At the end, I'll go over a 5-step plan for creating a story with a strong central theme, a recipe for emotionally slapping your reader so hard they'll wipe their tears and flip to the next page to learn what happens next. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about plot, so that we understand the difference between the two. A novel's plot is what happens in the story, the sequence of events that create the narrative, with every scene leading into the next. Plot is not just a summation of events, but a list of cause and effects that trigger from one to another. This means that a list of random occurrences is not considered a plot. There must be a solid through line connecting each piece together. These pieces are usually referred to as plot points. Because plots are a series of steps, there's a shape or structure to how they all fit together. I go into this more in previous episodes, but every story has a plot structure, though it is not always the same structure. For my current work in progress, I decided to use the 3-act story structure for mapping out my plot, as it's an old reliable of the structures, with many of the more modern ones being based on the 3-act structure. If you want to learn more about this, check out episode 2, Narrative Structure, because maps save lives. No matter what structure is used, they all help map the steps of the plot, each step leading to and causing the next one to occur. While every story is unique, they are also not. I'll elaborate more on this later, but every story ever told can be grouped by similarities of plot. This idea may not be as new to you as it sounds. You have heard many of these plots before, but let's go over 3 examples just to give you an idea. My first example is the Rebellion Against the One plot. This plot features a hero who rebels against the almighty entity that controls the world that the hero lives in. The great power can be represented by society, government, or even God. Depending on the story, the hero is either forced to surrender to the power, generally marked as a tragedy like George Orwell's 1984, or the hero refuses to submit and eventually wins out against the grand power, like Neo in the Matrix movies. My second example is the quest plot. Everybody loves a good quest plot, whether it's Lord of the Rings, Watership Down, or Fern Gully. In all cases, the plot features a hero who embarks on a journey to obtain a prize or destroy an evil artifact. In most cases, these are tales with happy endings, but the quest plot can be turned into a tragedy if the object of the hero's desire doesn't bring them happiness, like Moby Dick. Next, we have the rebirth plot. In this last example, the hero is trapped by a dark power or villain until they are freed by another character's loving act. Though this plot has run out of fashion due to it generally featuring heroines who don't solve their own problems, there are still plenty of worthwhile examples that have popped up in the recent decades. A great example of this shift would be to compare the classic German fairy tale Rapunzel to the 2010 Disney film Tangled. Though Tangled changed the script to make the main character a driving force in their own story, it's still a great rebirth plot as it is an outside force that kickstarts the adventure to free herself from her current situation. While there are thousands of ways to categorize plots, what matters is that these categories are just the broad strokes of the story. There are limitless ways to write these plots and fill in all the gaps between the bristles. That is what makes the story you are writing important and unique, the fact that you are finding the way to fill in those gaps. Now, on to theme. If the plot is what happens in the story, then the theme is what the story is about. It's the underlying message or big idea of the story. The next time you're reading or listening to an audiobook, ask yourself, what critical idea about life is the author trying to tell me? This idea or belief tends to be something universal that transcends the barriers of culture. Theme is what the story means. If you're still lost, I have a few examples to go over that may help. The first one is coming of age. A staple of young adult fiction, the coming of age theme deals with the experience of learning what it means to no longer be a child. This theme tends to ask questions like, what is the meaning of responsibility? Or what kind of person do I want to be? Great Expectations by Charles Dickens and 90% of Disney movies are great examples of this theme. My second example is justice. This theme dives into the ideas of order, law, and fairness. There are many avenues to explore justice as a theme, but some common questions addressed here are, what is the difference between justice and vengeance? And who is best equipped to dispense justice? Hamlet by William Shakespeare and To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee both feature justice as a core theme, though they each approach it from a different angle. My final example is power and corruption. Power in this theme can refer to a person's political leadership, personal wealth, physical ability, or any other form of power. Stories with this theme feature questions like, does power always corrupt those who gain it? And what happens when the weak become powerful? George Orwell's Animal Farm and William Golding's Lord of the Flies both question the relationship between power and corruption. As you may have noticed with some of these examples, themes tend to deal with the heavier side of life's lessons. That is what makes them so important and impactful to the reader. I suspect one of the reasons that Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archives series is so popular is because of the emotional resonance readers have with the series theme. Life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination is the first tenet of the Order of Knights in the series, and many of the characters, scenes, and plot devices approach this idea of what it means to put the journey of life before your desired goal. The story resonates with readers because the lessons Sanderson is trying to impart on them apply to so many of the fans. There is usually more than one theme to a story, though it is common to have a single core theme with many smaller thematic threads that tie into the central meaning of the story. If you have ever read, listened, or watched something and felt that it was a little flat or shallow, that is often a sure sign that the story lacked a clear theme. Explosions and laughs are great entertainment, but unless those explosions are learning what it means to become a caretaker, they are not likely to keep an audience for the long run. In order for a story to be meaningful to the reader, it requires a well-developed theme. Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman exemplifies this phenomena very well. The first book of this series is wildly entertaining. I'd even call it the best action comedy I have ever read, and do so in last week's episode where I went over the 6 books I read in April and what I learned from them. By the time I got to the end of the first book, I was only entertained. There are only so many times I can laugh at a foot fetish joke. The humor and action was strong enough to carry me to the second book, but I knew it wouldn't be enough to continue the series if nothing changed. But Dinneman surprised me through a slow and steady cultivation of themes that now give me literal chills when I finish one of his books. So not only am I laughing and enjoying the action as I read about Carl and Donut's adventures, I'm seeing the change in their relationship and learning about the resilience of the human spirit when oppressed. But Michael, how does one develop a theme? Well, I'm glad you asked, person I totally made up for the sake of a convenient transition. The process for developing a story's theme is different for every author-adjacent writer, and like most things in writing, you will have to experiment to see what works for you and your story. For many, the theme is accidental or discovered along the way. After all, it's easier to focus on the more tangible plot when creating a story. This is how I created or discovered my theme for my current project. I was roughly 2/3 of the way through my first draft when I started to notice that all of my characters were dealing with aspects of truth. What does it mean to trust yourself, or to trust others, to become trustworthy? Now as I work on the second draft, I look for opportunities to lean into those themes. For others, the theme is the spark that ignites the story. Ursula K. Le Guin started each of her fantasy and sci-fi stories with a message that she intended to convey to the reader and developed her story around that message from the very beginning. Stories that start with a theme tend to be stronger in their message, as it is easier to impart the story's lesson if you know what it is from the start. In either case, if the author believes something about life strong enough, it is likely to be reflected on the page. Theme is not just an idea. It's an idea plus an observation, a perspective on what that idea means. If you are ever struggling to identify what the theme of a story is, ask yourself, what are the characters dealing with? Most good stories have the characters experience a change or learn a lesson along the way. More often than not, that change or lesson is part of the story's theme. It's important to note that the lesson the character learns is not always the lesson intended for the reader. Authors can impart their message to the reader by showing the consequences of a character's chosen path, rather than the character learning and internalizing that lesson. Due to this relationship between characters and themes can be particularly powerful in character-driven stories. But themes can be shown through other tools available to the author as well, such as plot, setting, conflict, and even word choice. But Michael, how does plot and theme work together? Another great question from that totally made-up individual that sounds just like me. A story is best served when the plot and the theme work together hand in hand. By intertwining the two, you can create a story that not only entertains, but also resonates with the readers on a deeper level, inviting them to reflect on the broader messages and ideas conveyed within the narrative. Through research and experience, I've come up with a series of steps for outlining a story with theme and plot working together in mind. I wish I had known about this path before my current project, but I plan to carry these steps into my next writing venture. I'll explain the steps here in the hope that they will help you now. Step 1. Establish your theme. Like I mentioned before, I did not start my current project knowing what my story's theme would be, but I wish I had. Knowing what idea and observation you want to convey to the reader from the start will help mold the characters, plot, and even the setting to help uphold that theme, rather than having to force the theme into the story later on, like I'm doing now in my second draft. Step 2. Develop the characters and conflict. Once you have your theme in mind, create characters and conflicts that align with and explore that theme. Your protagonist's journey should reflect the central theme in some way, whether through their struggles, growth, or the choices they make. Introduce obstacles and challenges that force the characters to confront the theme head-on. As mentioned before, I have a character whose central theme is learning to become trustworthy and what that means to them. This automatically informs me that she needs to start the story as an untrustworthy individual. And that is how Amara became a financially struggling noble smuggler who wouldn't blink twice at using underhanded methods to get what she wants. Step number 3 is craft the plot. Yep, the plot doesn't get to show up to this party until step 3. Build your plot around the characters and the conflicts you've established, ensuring that each event and development serves to advance the story and deepen the thematic exploration. Consider how the plot can illustrate the different facets of the theme and invoke emotional responses from the reader. This means I need to have my character Amara show the reader that she is untrustworthy in the beginning and create a plot where she has multiple opportunities to either become trustworthy or continue on her current path. Step number 4. Showcase the theme through events. Use key plot points, scenes, and character interactions to reinforce and explore the theme. These moments should not only drive the story forward, but also provide opportunities for thematic exploration and reflection. Show how characters' actions and decisions are influenced by the central theme. Throughout my current story, Amara discovers the consequences of doing everything herself and how having allies doesn't make her weak. This is all shown by the plot points, each a step that leads into the next by showing her progression through the theme. And finally, step 5, create resolution and reflection. As the story progresses, lead it towards a resolution that addresses the central conflict and ties back to the theme in a meaningful way. Whether the resolution is positive or negative, ensure that it resonates with the thematic message you've been exploring. Use the conclusions of the story to reflect on that theme and leave a lasting impression on the reader. After everything falls apart for Amara due to her selfish actions, she is able to make it through the climax of the story and reflect on how having strong allies allowed her to reach her goals. I understand that might be vague spoilers for my work in progress, but that is the kind of backstage access you get by listening to this episode of Author Adjacent. You're welcome. Anyways, these 5 steps are broad strokes that can fit into any writer's process, whether you're a planner or a plotter. I hope it helps you create your next story with a strong central theme. Alright folks, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Author Adjacent. Thanks for hanging out with me today as I talked about themes, plots, and some insights into my current project. Once again, I'm Michael Vadney. If any of this was helpful or even just gave you a good chuckle, consider supporting the show by leaving a review on your podcast platform of choice or telling your friends about the show. For more Author Adjacent, you can follow me on X at AuthorAdjacent or shoot me an email at authoradjacent@gmail.com with your burning questions, comments, and topic ideas. New episodes drop every other week, so stay tuned. But be aware I am tweaking the schedule currently as I learn more about how all this podcasting stuff works. Now remember, the journey from writer to author might be long, but until then, let's be author adjacent together.